a lot of people, when they are actually trying to learn a language, invest a lot of time and a lot of effort into completely useless things that aren't actually giving them a return on the time and effort they're putting in. And what I mean by that is they're not actually going to learn a language because they're not actually making progress in the language they're learning. So in this video, I'm going to explain basically how a lot of people waste so much time with learning words and they don't actually make progress. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to explain how you can actually make progress and be fulfilled that you are making proper progress in the language you're learning. So let's go. The problem, which is not actually the problem, it's more of a symptom of the problem, but this is effectively what happens with a lot of people. So here's you're grinding away learning words, you're doing flashcards, you're doing all these other things, and the reason you are putting effort and time and effort into things that aren't necessarily fun is because the perceived payoff is bigger than the effort required. So what that means is that although you do have to put effort into flashcards and it's not particularly fun, you know that overall one day it will pay off and you will actually become better at the language, which is what you want. So it's worth the investment. And then what happens is you start to forget words and you're not making good progress in the language you're learning. And so what happens because of that is you start to get frustrated and you start to feel that you're wasting your time, and the paradigm actually shifts where now the effort required is actually greater than the perceived payoff because you don't feel as if this work you're putting in is actually resulting in you getting any better. And that basically results in you being even more frustrated, anxious that you've just wasted a bunch of time, and you inevitably give up so that you don't have to continue wasting time and feeling frustrated. That is the reality for a lot of people, including myself back in the day when I had to deal with this problem. So the actual problem is the stuff that you are doing to learn words at the moment is not only not productive, but it's also not fun. And what that results in is the paradigm shift where you see, okay, the effort I'm putting in clearly isn't paying off now, I don't want to do it anymore. So what you need to understand is how to actually be productive in a language and how to actually learn things in a way that's different to what you're doing right now. What you need to understand is that if we're learning vocab in a foreign language, vocab just means words, by the way, if you didn't know. If we're learning vocab right, what we're actually doing is locking it into our long-term memory. You've got short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory is like if I told you a 5-digit number, like 52317, you remember 52317 for the next minute maybe. By the end of this video, you're not going to remember that anymore. You're definitely not going to remember it tomorrow because it's only in your short-term memory. Long-term memory is things you remember long-term, like, months, years, etc. Like the English language, like your own name, just, what your house, what your address is, that kind of stuff. And what we're doing when we're learning a language is we're not just learning new words, we're actually locking them into our long-term memory so that we can remember them long-term and use them. And what a lot of people do is they're only learning the definitions of words. They're not actually locking them into their long-term memory. And this is extremely important to understand because if you can't grasp this principle, you're going to continue learning words and not actually remember any of them, which means you're going to waste even more time, feel even more frustrated, and you're not going to make any progress in the language you're learning, and you're basically going to be unsuccessful in your goal. So what I want you to understand is that just doing flashcards inconsistently, just doing random language learning tasks does not actually result in you learning the language because you're not locking these things into your long-term memory. The way you lock new information into your long-term memory, obviously you need to learn the definition of the word. You can't, lock it in without knowing what the word means. But the way you lock things into your long-term memory is by teaching your brain that new information is important. The reason you have a long-term memory is to store important information. Your short-term memory is for things that aren't important. You just need to remember them right now. Oh, go do this task. Oh, remember this code so you can put it in, then never use it again. That's for your short-term memory. Your long-term memory is for crucial things that you need for survival. It's evolutionary. And that hasn't changed our brains haven't changed since like caveman times where we needed to remember things so that we didn't get mauled by a tiger. So what you actually need to do when you're language learning is do things that are going to teach your brain this new information that we've never seen before or needed before is extremely important to understand. And the way we do that is through a few different things. One is to practice implementation. So when you learn things, you don't just learn them, you actually use them straight away. And this teaches your brain that, okay, we've never used this information before, but now we need to use it, which is why we need to remember it effectively. I'd also recommend, actually, I'll give you an example on that before we move on. An example would be, say you do flashcards, for example, you're learning food-related words. Actually, say you're learning animal-related words, because I was brushing up on that recently in the language you're learning. not only do you do the flashcards, for example, but immediately after you've done the flashcard deck, you write out as many of the animals as you can remember, or you write a short story, or you film yourself speaking about them if you're at a level where you can do that. And what that's called is implementation. So as soon as you've learned new material, for example, the words, you actually implement it straight away. And that is effectively teaching your brain, okay, although we've never needed to use it before, we now need to use it. So not only am I being exposed to it through flashcards, but I actually need to remember this new information because it's important. You don't need to torture yourself or like try and convince your brain you're going to die if you don't know it, but just implementing it a lot after you've actually learnt the words teaches your brain that this is crucial information. Another very important tip I will give you is to stack learning methods. So what I mean by stack learning methods is to use various different ways of learning. If, for example, you only use flashcards to learn words, it's one kind of tunnel into your brain's long-term memory. If you can use a bunch of different learning methods to learn the same thing, what you're actually doing is teaching your brain this is incredibly important because it's encountering it in a lot of different ways. So I'll give you an example. With those animal-related words, if we're just doing flashcards, fine, you might learn some of them, you might remember them for a bit, it might be a bit foggy, but you could still kind of do it. What's way better is if you were doing learning those animal-related words, you were practicing writing out those words into a story, you were listening or watching vlogs related to animals because it's an interest of yours, you were listening to a podcast about it, you were speaking about it and recording yourself, and because you made a game or some kind of creative project relating to it, and because you're doing all of these things that all relate to animals, what actually happens is that your brain understands, okay, this isn't just important, this is really important because we're actually encountering this stuff from a lot of different directions. And it's the same with anything. If you want to learn government related words, if you want to learn fitness related words, learn the words with flashcards, practice writing about them, make a diagram if you're a visual learner, or even if you're not, watch vlogs about them, do a bunch of different things, and you'll actually find, put your habit tracker / daily to-do list of the gym and what exercises you're doing into a thing. Write out notes on your phone in Russian or whatever language you're learning for the exercises you're doing. Put things like that into the language you're learning. And what you'll find is when you start doing all of these different things, it's way easier to remember stuff because your brain actually understands that this is important, and that is the key to learning. And the final thing I will say is to practice immersion. I kind of mentioned that when I talked about putting like things into the foreign language, but basically if you can put your to-do list, your calendar, random things on your phone widgets into the foreign language you're learning, that's called immersion. It's basically surrounding yourself with the language, and that also kind of helps with learning it. But yeah, and if you are serious about learning a foreign language, I'd highly recommend you scroll down and check out the link to the Language Learning Accelerator. It's got everything you need and nothing that you don't for learning a language, and I don't want to see any of you frustrated and anxious that, months go by and you know nothing in the language, you can't speak to native speakers or anything like that. But I guarantee you, if you do check out that course, it'll solve all of those problems, and I will personally get in touch with you to guarantee that happens. So good luck with this. Hopefully this video did help you a bit. Don't let them win, and make sure you hit the subscribe button.